నమస్కారం. నా ఈ ప్రయత్నం మీకు నచ్చినట్లయితే గనక మన ఛానల్‌ని సబ్స్క్రైబ్ చేసుకొని పై జాబితాలోని మరిన్ని వీడియోలను చూడటం ద్వారా మీ నైపుణ్యాలను, జ్ఞానాన్ని కూడా అభివృద్ధి చేసుకోవడానికి ప్రయత్నించండి. జై హింద్. Please like, share and subscribe for more videos. Thank you.
Pawns are the soul of chess. Do you know who said this famous quote and when did he say it? We are talking about François-André Danican Philidor, shortly known as Philidor, who was a French composer and chess player in the 18th century. But not just any chess player. Philidor was the best at the time and a pioneer. The way Philidor played chess was a radical departure from all previous understandings of chess. In fact, his concepts, the value of his positional play, would not be fully realized until a century later. We are going to look at one of my favorite games by Philidor, in which the importance of these tiny soldiers, the pawns, and the pawn structure will be demonstrated. The year is 1790, London, and Philidor plays with the black pieces against Andrew Smith. e4, e5, bishop c4, the bishop's opening, which was very popular at the time. Knight f6, d3, and c6 by Philidor. Clear intention here, grabbing the center with his pawns, taking the control of the central squares. This was prevented by his opponent, bishop g5, pinning the knight on f6. And now h6, questioning that bishop whether it wants to retreat, stay on this diagonal, or capture on f6. Bishop takes f6 was played by white, after which queen takes f6. Black has got the pair of bishops, but we are here to talk about pawns, so have a look. Knight c3, and instead of a natural developing move like bishop to c5, black goes for b5. Boom! This is move 6, 18th century, b5. Bishop to b3, and now a5. Let's go! All in. Of course, black is threatening to trap the bishop, so all these moves make a lot of sense, but it was not common to play like this back then. After a3, at last, black develops his bishop with a threat of mate on f2, which is always good. Knight to f3, and now here comes another pawn move, d6. Of course, he wants to develop his bishop. He cannot just keep it on c8, but it's interesting that he chooses d6 instead of a natural developing move, which is castling, castle kingside in this position. The d6 was played in the game. How many pawn moves actually? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 pawn moves in only 9 moves in total, up to this point. Just a side note. Bishop e6, here we go, development. And my favorite moment of the game comes. Bishop takes f6, and pause this video for a moment and just have a look at the two options. Black can take on e6 with the queen and with the pawn. Pause the video and consider which one would you have chosen. Hello again. In the 18th century, I think if I was a person from the 18th century, I would have taken with the queen, because why would I want to bother doubling pawns? What's the point of doubling pawns? Well, Philidor just went for it. This is the year 1790, and he takes on e6 with the pawn, which for me is fascinating, because I don't think it was natural at all. It's such a profound understanding. Double pawns have pros and cons, and here, a clear pro for this move, an advantage for black, is that it opens up the f file, so black will have the control of the f file, semi-open file. Plus, this pawn on e6 is now controlling more key squares in the center. Together with his buddies, the e5, d6 and c6 pawns, this is a really strong center for black. White castled kingside, and here comes another move that must have been really atypical of the time. You would expect castle kingside, I think. I would have definitely considered castling kingside here. Instead, Philidor plays g5. Wow. Really modern handling of the position. Attacking on the king side instead of castling. His king is in the middle of the board and he's not developing the b8 knight just yet. Here comes the knight, but first he went g5 and after knight h2, threatening a regrouping of this knight, he just goes further on the king side, h5. And black is better. Black's king is in the middle of the board, he hasn't finished development and black's position is better. It's an advantage already. g3, just trying to keep up with the king side. And there you go. Hyper modern Philidor, king to e7. This is the 18th century. And he kissed his king in the middle of the board on purpose. A pioneer, a true pioneer. King to g2. And now he went for d5. This is a move that nowadays we would consider an inaccuracy, but let's just remind us that it was played over 200 years ago, so let's not be too judgmental. A natural move would have been rook a to f8, just putting more pressure on the f5. Instead, d5. It's interesting that he goes for d5 with the king on e7, so for instance white could consider capturing this pawn to try to open the position, but it wouldn't have been very successful. When the rook comes to the e-file, black can either play king to d6 or king to d8. And the intention is placing the king on c7. It will be just perfectly fine on c7, as if it has castled. The king will be safe there, and then the rook can come to the king side. It's all about the king side attack now, not the queen side. After d5, f3, Philidor goes knight f8. And here white would have had some chances of creating counterplay, I think, after knight e2, knight g6 and c4 would have been the best move. But once again, let's just go with the game because it's very instructive, and we are not looking for perfection, we are looking for the way to learn from this game. And the idea behind knight f8 is clearly to bring the knight to g6 and then try to take advantage of the h4 and f4 squares once he can get rid of the g3 pawn. So he's going to target the g3 pawn and try to take advantage of the f4 and h4 squares with the knight. So this is already a very profound idea as well. Rook a to f8 was once again an option, but it could have been a mess after b4. This pawn cannot be captured with the bishop because then white wins the piece back, sacrificing on d5, and then the bishop is captured on b4. So some complications, but the game went on with f3, knight f8, knight e2, knight g6, as we mentioned already, and c3. I think this is a little too passive, aiming for d4, but it's not going to work out so well for white. The rook comes to the g5 here. All the pieces are targeting the white king on g2. All the black pieces are targeting this poor, very poor king on g2. d4, trying to open up the position since black's king is in the middle of the board, but not so successful as I mentioned. White will not achieve what he wanted. He takes on e5, and now perhaps knight takes e5 was really strong. Philidor took back with the queen on e5, after which knight to d4, threatening a fork on c6. King d7 was spotted and parried. Rook a to e1, and here comes the moment when I will ask you once again to pause the video in this critical moment. Try to see first of all if white is threatening something, because you should always care about your opponent's plan first, and then once you decided whether you need to worry about something or not, let's see how would you have continued in this position. What do you think should be the way to go forward? Yes? Some great thoughts, hopefully. The threat of e takes d5 is not such a big deal. We can allow it because after that, yeah, the queen will be hanging on e5, but you can take back on d5 with the queen. So that is not too bad if we can create a stronger threat. So yeah, we have some time to create a stronger threat than this capture on d5. And the stronger threat is of course against the white king. h4, threatening queen takes g3, which is of course really, really dangerous. Queen f2. How to continue, how to hit that g3 pawn. We mentioned that we were going to attack it so that the knight could jump to f4 or h4. We are targeting this poor pawn on g3. Bishop to c7. More wood on the fire. Yes, this pawn is about to fall. Knight to e2, trying to hold on to dear life. But it doesn't have for long. After h takes g3, we've got the squares that we wanted. The f4 and h4 squares are now exposed. Those are weaknesses in white's camp, and that is because of the pawn structure. So this has been, first of all, a very brave pawn play by black. Launching his pawns on the king side, doubling pawns in the center, opening the f5 with the doubling of those pawns. Just great control of the center and launching his kingside attack thanks to his pawns opening up the h file in this position, but also in general opening up the position and weakening squares. The f4 and h4 squares are exposed because this g3 pawn disappears. It's all about the pawn structure. Everything in this game is about how important pawns are in chess. Queen takes g3 was played, but it doesn't even matter that white manages to trade queens. The problem is that this knight appears on f4 and the position collapses. The h3 pawn is about to fall, and once that pawn falls, the rest of the position will fall. Have a look. King h1, rook takes h3, threatening to double rooks and take on g3 at the same time. Rook g1, and instead of simply bringing the rook, which was good, but then white could still defend by bringing the knight back to f1, Philidor goes for the kill. Wanna pause the video and find it yourself? You have a moment to do it. Rook takes h2 check. King takes. And now comes the rook. There's no square for the king. He has to give up the knight in order to vacate the square on g3. But now it's 2 pieces for the rook, so it's already enough material. And black is going to win even more material after knight h3 check. The game finished after king g4 and rook h4. Beautiful mate, but it would have been game over as well if the king goes to g2, simply because we captured the rook and it is a piece up for black. How did you like the game? Did you find fascinating that, first of all, Philidor doubled pawns? Was not even needed to do it, but he went for it. 18th century, doubling pawns and then launching the pawn storm with his king in the middle of the board, comfortably placing his king on e7. Like, what? It is one of my favorite games by Philidor, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do. Please check out his book, Analysis of Chess, which was a manual that later on went on to inspire future generations, and so many things could be learned from his book. All these deep understandings of positional play and the importance of pawns. And also, if you would like to, check out his operas, check out his compositions. There are plenty on YouTube. And I will see you in the next video.